A faded line on an ancient map marks a river that should not be there. This is not a simple mistake, but a clue to a forgotten way of seeing the world. These phantom rivers, charted across deserts and plains, held a secret known only to the rain. By the end of this journey, you will understand how to read these old maps not as errors, but as complex codes blending hard science with powerful myth. We will uncover why a mapmaker would draw a waterway no explorer could always find, and what these elusive streams tell us about humanity's relationship with a living, breathing Earth. What does a landscape remember that we have forgotten? A single candle flickers, illuminating a vast sheet of parchment spread across a heavy wooden table. The cartographer's hand hovers, holding a quill loaded with ink. His world is not one of satellites and aerial surveys, but of fragments. He possesses a handful of coordinates from weary sailors, merchant ledgers describing trade routes, and ancient texts filled with marvels. But his most crucial sources are the stories told by travelers around campfires, tales passed down through generations. These accounts are not neat and tidy. One merchant swears he sailed down a wide, flowing river in a land of dust, while a soldier, marching the same route a season later, reports only a cracked, barren canyon. The mapmaker is caught in an impossible position. He must create a single, authoritative image of the world from a chaotic puzzle of truths, half-truths, and deeply held beliefs. His task is not merely to record, but to decide. Does he draw the river that the merchant saw, or does he trust the soldier's account of a dry wasteland? This is the cartographer's fundamental dilemma, a constant balancing act between the hard evidence of a witnessed event and the powerful weight of oral tradition. In an age before instant communication, local folklore was not dismissed as mere superstition. It was a vital database of environmental knowledge, stories of lands that bloomed only under a full moon, or of plains that turned to shallow lakes when the stars aligned in a certain way, were considered serious geographical intelligence. The mapmaker's pen becomes an instrument of interpretation, weaving these threads together. To leave a blank space on the map was an admission of ignorance, a void that could be filled with monsters or rival claims. It was often a safer, more complete choice to ink in the river that was sometimes there, honoring the collective memory of the landscape over the fleeting observation of a single individual. This foundational struggle, this blurring of the line between measured fact and living myth, is the very reason our phantom rivers were born. They are not simple mistakes, but complex compromises, born from the need to make sense of a world that refused to stay the same. And this leads us directly to the Earth itself, to the specific, dramatic environmental phenomena that could make a river appear and vanish, convincing everyone, from the local farmer to the scholarly mapmaker, of its ghostly presence. The Earth itself holds the key to the phantom river's mystery. Picture the most desolate desert you can imagine, a vast expanse of cracked earth and sun-bleached stone where nothing seems to move for centuries. This is the domain of the wadi. For most of the year, a wadi is a deep, dry scar in the landscape, a silent canyon where the only sound is the wind whistling through ancient rock. It is a place of profound absence, but when the rare, colossal rainstorm finally arrives, often from 100 miles away, this empty channel undergoes a terrifying and beautiful transformation. The parched ground cannot absorb the deluge. Instead, the water gathers with shocking speed, roaring down the canyon as a churning, violent wall of mud and debris. In a matter of hours, the silent scar becomes a raging, temporary river, carving its way through the desert with immense power. A caravan that camped in the dry riverbed one evening could be utterly swept away by a torrent they never saw coming the next dawn. This ephemeral wadi is a river of moments, not seasons. It may flow for a single day or perhaps a week before the unrelenting sun and the thirsty ground drink it all away, leaving behind only damp silt and once again silence. For the nomadic tribes who knew these lands intimately, the wadi was not a myth. It was a vital, predictable part of life. Their survival depended on understanding its cycles, knowing that this dry canyon was a potential highway for water, a place where life would briefly explode after a distant storm. They passed down this knowledge through stories, warnings, and songs. So when a traveler from a far-off city, perhaps a merchant or a soldier, happened upon a wadi in full flood, the sight would be seared into their memory. They had witnessed a river, a real, flowing, powerful river. They would return to their homeland and report this incredible discovery to a mapmaker, who, faced with this eyewitness testimony and the corroborating lore of local tribes, would have little choice but to draw it in. The cartographer was not making a mistake. They were documenting a truth, but a truth with a tragically short lifespan. They were mapping a geographic event, not a permanent feature. The river was there, just as the witness said. It simply was not there for the next traveler who arrived a year later, or even a month later, finding only a dusty gulch under a blazing sun. This is how a river that lives for only a few days could earn a permanent place on a parchment meant to last for centuries, a ghost born from the dramatic, unpredictable heartbeat of the land itself. But the phantom river's mystery runs even deeper than the desert's surface. Beyond the dramatic flash floods of the wadi, another powerful force shaped the cartographer's pen, one that flowed from the human soul itself. Across the ancient world, a profound belief persisted in a hidden hydrological system, a network of vast subterranean rivers coursing deep beneath the soil. These were not merely geological features, they were sacred arteries of the earth, thought to surface only during moments of divine intervention, under specific planetary alignments, or after prayers had summoned life-giving rains. Consider the river Styx of Greek myth, a dark and powerful waterway that formed the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead. It was not just a story, it was a place with tangible power, and some ancient scholars genuinely debated its physical location on the map. Or the Saraswati River, revered in Hindu scriptures as a mighty goddess and a life-giving stream. While much of its course is now believed to be underground, its legendary presence was so potent that mapmakers for centuries felt compelled to include it, depicting a river that flowed as much through faith as through any visible channel. For a cartographer steeped in these beliefs, the distinction between a spiritual truth and a physical one was often blurry. If a sacred text described a river that had vanished from the surface to flow within the earth, and if local people spoke of places where water mysteriously bubbled up from the ground after a heavy storm, the logical conclusion was that the legendary river was still there, just hidden. This was further supported by observable yet misunderstood natural phenomena. In regions with karst topography, where limestone bedrock is easily dissolved by water, entire rivers can indeed disappear into sinkholes, traveling underground for miles before re-emerging elsewhere. A mapmaker seeing a river vanish into a cavern and hearing tales of its reappearance far away might connect these dots with the grand myth of a global underworld flow. The result on the parchment was a river drawn with confidence, a feature waiting not for a random desert storm, but for a sacred moment of revelation. These cartographic ghosts were not errors in the modern sense. They were representations of a sacred geography, a landscape imbued with meaning and power that was just as real, if not more real, than its mere physical appearance. The map was not only a guide to the land you could see, but also to the land you were meant to believe in. This fusion of spiritual belief and practical observation created some of history's most enduring phantom rivers, prompting a haunting question when we look at an old map. Are we seeing a failed attempt to document the world, or are we reading a profound statement about a world alive with unseen forces? These spiritual beliefs were not confined to the margins of the map, they were central to its very purpose. For many medieval cartographers, especially those working within the walls of monasteries, the act of mapping was a form of devotion. The world was understood as a divine creation, and every mountain, forest, and spring was seen as a testament to a higher power. A spring that bubbled up only after the seasonal rains was not merely a temporary water source, it was a sacred site. It was considered a temporary gateway to the divine, a place where the veil between the earthly and the spiritual worlds grew thin. The mapmaker, often a monk or a scholar deeply embedded in this worldview, felt a profound responsibility to include these holy places. Their goal was not just geographical accuracy in our modern sense, but a higher form of truth, the representation of a cosmos alive with spiritual significance. This is why a river that appeared only fleetingly might be drawn with the same bold, unwavering line as the Nile or the Danube. Its physical inconsistency was irrelevant next to its spiritual permanence. It was a divine manifestation, a place of pilgrimage. The map itself became a spiritual document, a guide for the soul as much as for the body. A traveler using such a map would not be frustrated to find a dry riverbed where a blue line was marked. Instead, they might understand they had arrived at a hallowed location, a place where prayer or ritual could summon the waters, just as the stories said. The cartographer was not lying, they were translating a deeper reality onto parchment. This practice of sacred geography explains why some maps feature rivers that seem to flow in impossible directions or connect lands that have no hydrological link. They were mapping connections of faith, not of water. The river on the parchment was a symbol of a pilgrimage route, a spiritual pathway leading to a holy site. It represented a journey of transformation that a believer was meant to undertake. In this light, the phantom river is not an error to be corrected, but a symbol to be interpreted. These maps challenge our modern assumption that the only reality worth documenting is the one we can consistently measure and see. They present a world where myth and landscape are woven together into a single, inseparable tapestry. And the threads of that tapestry were spun from the stories of the very people who walked that land, the travelers, pilgrims, and merchants whose first-hand accounts provided the raw, unfiltered data that filled the cartographer's workshop. The mapmaker's studio was a crucible where the raw, unverified testimonies of the world were forged into a single image of authority. A merchant, back from a year-long trek along the Silk Roads, stands before the cartographer's table. His clothes are dusty, his eyes tired, but his voice is animated as he describes the marvels he witnessed. He speaks of a city of gold, of forests filled with strange beasts, and of a wide, silver river that appeared one morning in the heart of a desert, a miracle that saved his caravan from thirst. His account is compelling, vivid, and deeply personal. But is it entirely true? The merchant is not a scientist, he is a storyteller. His memory is colored by the extreme hardship of the journey, the fever he endured, and the powerful, very human desire to make his tale worthy of his audience's attention. Perhaps the river was not so wide, perhaps it was only a shallow stream, or perhaps he only saw it during the single week of the year when the seasonal rains fall, and he simply assumed it was always there. He is an unreliable witness, not out of malice, but out of the simple frailty of human perception. These second-hand and third-hand accounts were the lifeblood of cartography for centuries. A mapmaker in Lisbon or Constantinople had to stitch together the world from a patchwork of such stories, each one filtered through the lens of personal experience, cultural bias, and sometimes outright fabrication. The line between a carefully observed fact and a compelling tall tale was impossibly thin. A river described by one traveler as mighty and endless might be reported as a minor creek by another. The cartographer had to choose which truth to immortalize in ink. Often, the more dramatic account won out simply because it was more memorable. This is how a fleeting seasonal stream, witnessed once by a weary but persuasive traveler, could become a major, permanent artery on a world map. The Phantom River was born not from a lie but from a story. It was a geographical echo of human drama, a testament to our innate need to embellish, to find wonder, and to make sense of our experiences through narrative. To understand these old maps, we must learn to read them not as failed attempts at photographic accuracy, but as complex cultural documents. They are as much records of what people believed they saw and what they wanted to believe was there as they are records of the land itself. The blue line on the parchment is not just a river, it is a story, a prayer, a memory, and a mistake, all woven together into a single, enduring symbol. A dashed blue line on an ancient chart was not a sign of uncertainty, but a precise cartographic statement. These mapmakers were speaking a sophisticated visual language, a code of lines, colors, and symbols designed to convey the dynamic nature of the world. Where we see a simple river, they might have been illustrating a seasonal torrent, a legendary waterway, or a sacred spring. On many medieval mappa mundi, the intricate circular maps that served as encyclopedias of faith and knowledge, a river drawn with a wavy, almost nervous line could signify its intermittent flow. A unique shade of pale blue might distinguish a rain-fed stream from the deep, permanent indigo of a major river like the Nile. Some charts used tiny illustrations of reeds or specific fish only found in floodplains to hint at a waterway's temporary nature. The problem is that this delicate symbolic language was incredibly fragile. As maps were hand-copied over generations, a tired scribe might simplify a dashed line into a solid one. A colorist running out of a particular pigment might substitute it for a more common hue, inadvertently transforming a seasonal creek into a permanent fixture on the map. The original, nuanced meaning was lost in translation, leaving behind what we now perceive as an error. To understand these documents, we must learn to read their visual grammar. A Portolan chart designed for navigation might show a river mouth with unusual clarity but depict its inland course with a faint, broken line, a clear message to sailors that this was a feature not to be relied upon for fresh water beyond the coast. These were not mistakes, they were data visualizations for an era that accepted the impermanence of the landscape. The cartographer was not failing to depict reality, they were capturing a more complex reality, one of cycles and possibilities. This entire system of thought, this way of encoding the world, was built upon a foundation laid centuries earlier by the scholars and geographers of the classical world whose works were rediscovered and revered as the ultimate authority. Even the most meticulous cartographer could be held captive by a ghost from the past. The most powerful mapmaker of the ancient world never set foot in most of the lands he described. Claudius Ptolemy, working in the Great Library of Alexandria in the 2nd century, compiled all the geographical knowledge of the Greco-Roman world into a series of texts and maps that would become the foundation of Western cartography for the next 1400 years. His work was a monumental achievement, a system for projecting the spherical Earth onto a flat surface, complete with coordinates for thousands of locations. But it was also filled with errors, guesses, and descriptions of places, including rivers, that he knew only from the conflicting reports of others. When his texts were rediscovered in Europe during the Renaissance, they were not seen as historical curiosities. They were received as gospel truth, the unassailable wisdom of the ancients. A Renaissance scholar holding a newly translated copy of Ptolemy's Geographia faced a crisis of authority. On one hand, there were the daring reports from contemporary explorers sailing around Africa and across the Atlantic, describing a world utterly unknown to the classical mind. On the other hand, there was the weight of Ptolemy's immense reputation. Who was he to correct the greatest geographer of antiquity? The result was a strange and often contradictory hybrid. Cartographers would painstakingly engrave the accurate coastlines of the Americas onto their copper plates, but then they would fill the vast, unexplored interiors with rivers and mountain ranges lifted directly from Ptolemy's ancient descriptions. If a modern explorer returned from a journey and reported that a great river Ptolemy described in Asia simply did not exist, the mapmaker was often faced with a difficult choice. It was easier to assume the explorer had missed it or that the river had simply dried up than to question the foundational text of their entire science. This reverence for classical authority effectively fossilized geographical errors for centuries. A legendary river mentioned by Ptolemy would be copied from map to map, each generation of cartographers trusting the source more than their own contemporary evidence. The Phantom River gained a kind of immortality not because it was seen but because it was written. It existed in the library and therefore it had to exist on the land. This intellectual inertia shows us that a map is never just a representation of the earth. It is also a map of power, a document that reveals which voices a society trusts to describe reality. For generations, the voice of a long-dead scholar in Alexandria spoke louder than the living testimony of sailors and merchants. The lines on the parchment were drawn not only with ink, but with the heavy weight of tradition, a weight that could press a river into existence for centuries after the last drop of its water had vanished from the land. The legend of the River of Gold reveals a phantom river forged not by faith, but by pure human greed. Deep in the heart of Africa, European mapmakers for centuries charted a mighty waterway said to flow over sands of pure gold, a place where wealth could be scooped up by the handful. This was no simple geographical feature. It was a beacon of unimaginable riches, and its location on the map was a fluid thing, shifting with every new rumor whispered in a port tavern or recorded in an explorer's journal. One map might place it in the Western Kingdoms, while another, drawn just a decade later, would show it cutting through the southern deserts, its course redirected by the persuasive account of a single adventurer. The river became a moving target on parchment, a cartographic mirage that lured expedition after expedition to their doom. The maps themselves fed this cycle of desire. A cartographer, hearing tales of gold dust traded along a seasonal river that swelled with the summer rains, might choose to depict that river with a permanent, confident line. In doing so, the map transformed a fleeting opportunity into a permanent destination. It suggested that the treasure was always there, just waiting for the right person to find it. The seasonal nature of the actual water source was often lost in translation, buried under the weight of the golden legend. These maps were not just tools for navigation, they were instruments of propaganda and fantasy, used to secure funding from kings and investors desperate to believe in a shortcut to prosperity. They charted a geography of avarice, where the lines on the page reflected the deepest wishes of the society that produced them. The Phantom River of Gold was a perfect cartographic representation of the treasure it promised, eternally present on the map, yet perpetually elusive in reality. This powerful blend of economic ambition and geographical imagination shows us that maps could be driven by the darkest of human impulses, creating phantoms that led men into the unknown. Yet for every river drawn from greed, there were others born from a more hopeful, if equally imaginative, impulse, the desire to fill the blank spaces of the world with wonders that spoke to our highest aspirations, not just our lowest cravings. A river could be drawn not because it was seen, but because it was necessary. The Enlightenment, an age of reason and order, brought with it a powerful desire to tidy up the messy, unpredictable chaos of the natural world. Philosophers and scientists began to envision a universe governed by elegant, mathematical laws, a grand clockwork mechanism of perfect balance. This yearning for cosmic harmony extended directly into the cartographer's workshop. A map was no longer just a tool, it could be a philosophical statement. If a vast, fertile plain appeared on the draft, yet was reported to be arid, a thoughtful mapmaker might feel a profound sense of dissonance. In a rationally ordered world, such a plain logically deserved, even demanded, a river to sustain it. To leave it barren was to admit a flaw in the divine blueprint. And so, with a stroke of the pen, the river would appear. This was not an act of forgery, but one of correction. The cartographer was completing nature's unfinished sentence, aligning the imperfect reality on the ground with the perfect ideal in the mind. Often, a subtle label would note the river as seasonal or rain-dependent, a quiet concession to observed facts that did not undermine the greater philosophical truth. These idealized rivers served a political purpose as well. A ruler commissioning a map of their kingdom might wish to project an image of prosperity and natural abundance, a land blessed with harmonious waterways, whether they consistently flowed or not. The map became an advertisement for a promised land, a vision of the territory as it was meant to be governed. This practice touches on a profound idea: environmental memory. A landscape, through its very shape and soil, can suggest what once was or what should be. A wide, U-shaped valley whispers of a powerful glacier that carved it millennia ago. A deep, meandering canyon, even when dry, is the unmistakable ghost of a river that once dominated the terrain. The Enlightenment mapmaker, in adding a river for the sake of balance, was perhaps intuiting this deep history, responding to the land's own silent testimony of past abundance. The phantom river on these maps is therefore a complex symbol. It is an error of fact but a truth of aspiration. It represents humanity's eternal struggle not just to map the world we inhabit, but to imagine the world we desire. This cartographic idealism, however, would soon face its greatest challenge, as a new era of scientific precision began to measure the Earth with an accuracy never before dreamed possible, threatening to erase these beautiful phantoms forever. The land itself never truly forgets the water that shaped it. Even in the driest desert, the Earth holds a memory of rain written in a language of stone and soil. A deep, meandering canyon carved through solid rock is not just an empty space. It is the ghost of a colossal river that flowed for millennia, a permanent scar left by an ancient power. To a traveler who understands this language, these signs are as clear as a blue line on a map. The smooth, rounded stones at the bottom of a dry wash were polished by countless years of flowing water. The specific, resilient vegetation that grows in a winding green ribbon across a plain is tapping into a deep water table, tracing the path of a hidden stream. These are not mere suggestions of water, they are the landscape's own testimony, a geological record of what has been and what could be again. A local guide pointing to a vast, barren arroyo might tell a cartographer, yes, this is a river. It flows when the sky remembers to weep. The mapmaker, hearing this and seeing the undeniable evidence carved into the earth, would inscribe the river onto the parchment. This was not a depiction of a current reality, but of a deep ecological truth. The river existed in a state of constant potential, a sleeping giant waiting for the right moment to awaken. This concept transforms the phantom river from a simple error into a prophecy. The map becomes a document of environmental memory, charting the cyclical heartbeat of the land rather than a single snapshot in time. It records a truth that is just as real as a flowing stream, the truth of a landscape that remembers its own abundance. This idea connects to a much older, more profound understanding of time itself, not as a straight line moving from past to future, but as a great turning wheel where everything that has vanished holds the potential to return. This modern insistence on a single, fixed reality creates the very conflict when we look at an old map. We see a line for a river that is dry most of the year, and we label it an error. But this judgment springs from a profound difference in how we perceive time itself. Our contemporary mapmaking is built upon a linear concept of time, a straight arrow flying from a forgotten past toward an unknown future. In this view, a geographical fact must be consistent and verifiable at any point along that line. A river is either present or absent, a binary condition that can be pinned down like a butterfly in a display case. This is the logic of satellites and GPS, a world captured in a definitive, digital instant. Yet for the cultures that produced many of these old maps, time was not a line but a circle, an endless, repeating wheel of seasons, rains, and celestial events. Within this cyclical understanding, a river that flows for 3 months of the year is not an intermittent feature. It is a permanent actor in the great drama of existence, simply taking its scheduled turn on the stage. The river is always present, even when it is sleeping beneath a bed of dust. To map it during its wet phase is not to make a mistake. It is to capture its essential truth, its most potent and life-giving manifestation. The map does not show a river that is sometimes there. It shows the river as it is meant to be within the eternal cycle. This logic extended far beyond rivers to encompass the entire cosmos. The predictable return of monsoons, the annual flooding of the Nile, the rhythmic appearance of constellations in the night sky, all of these were part of the same grand, circular pattern. A map was a snapshot of this celestial and terrestrial harmony, a single frame from a never-ending reel. When we dismiss these charts as inaccurate, we are not just correcting a geographical fact. We are imposing our linear, one-dimensional view of time upon a worldview that operated in richer, more complex dimensions. The Phantom River challenges us to expand our own perception, to ask if our modern maps, for all their precision, have lost the ability to depict the rhythmic, living pulse of the Earth. This ancient circular logic finds a startling echo in the most advanced science of our own era, where the very concept of a single, objective reality begins to dissolve. The stars themselves were thought to pull the strings of the rivers. In a world without weather satellites, the heavens were the ultimate clock and calendar, their movements believed to directly govern the tides of the atmosphere and the waters of the Earth. A cosmographer, deeply versed in both geography and astrology, would look at a river that appeared only during the spring floods and see not a random event, but the direct influence of a specific planetary alignment or the ascendancy of a watery constellation like Aquarius. To this scholar, the river was not merely a geographical feature, it was a celestial event made manifest on land. Including it on a map, therefore, was an act of profound scientific and spiritual recording. The blue line on the parchment was not just a guide to a place, but a guide to a time. It was a piece of predictive machinery. A traveler consulting such a map would see the river and understand that its waters could only be relied upon when the stars were right. This transformed the map from a static, two-dimensional picture into a dynamic, four-dimensional guide. It charted space and time simultaneously, encoding the rhythmic pulse of the cosmos into the very landscape. This practice was especially powerful when intertwined with prophetic traditions. A river said to flow only under a full moon in a certain sign might be seen as a gateway for spiritual energies, its appearance a sign from the gods. The map then became a tool for pilgrimage, indicating not only where to go, but precisely when to journey to witness a miracle or receive a blessing. The Phantom River, in this light, was not an error of observation but a peek into a scheduled reality. It was a feature that existed on a cosmic timetable, its presence on the map a promise of a future condition, a hidden truth waiting for the correct celestial key to unlock it. This astrological layer reveals a final, breathtaking dimension to these ancient documents. They were not attempts to capture the world as it was in a single moment, but as it behaved across the grand, turning wheel of time. A map could serve as a sacred blueprint for a world yet to be born. Across many traditions, the geography of the end times was described with startling precision. Prophetic texts spoke of rivers of fire that would cleanse the wicked, or of a single, crystal-clear stream that would flow from a holy mountain to heal the nations in a coming age of peace. For communities living in fervent expectation of these events, their maps were not records of the present, but previews of the imminent future. A cartographer belonging to a millennialist sect might carefully ink in the prophesied river of life, charting its course through a landscape that had not yet been transformed. To an outsider, this was a pure fantasy, a river that did not exist. But for the mapmaker and their community, it was the most real feature on the page, an article of faith soon to be made manifest. These were maps of prophecy, where every line was drawn with the conviction that divine will would soon reshape the earth to match the sacred plan. The map became a tool for spiritual preparation, showing believers where they should gather to witness the great events, or which valleys would be safe when the rivers of judgment began to flow. This practice reveals the ultimate power of cartography, the ability to depict not just what is, but what must be. In these documents, geography and destiny merge. A mountain range might be drawn not for its current height, but for its role in a prophesied battle. A desert might be labeled as the future site of a paradise, complete with the rivers that would make it bloom. The Phantom River on such a map is the ultimate expression of hope or dread, a feature pulled from the future into the present as a guide for the soul. It challenges our modern definition of a map's purpose entirely. Is a map only valid if it documents a verifiable past or present? Or can it also be a legitimate guide to a promised or feared reality? These prophetic charts suggest that the greatest maps have always been works of art as much as science, weaving threads of belief, expectation, and earthly observation into a single, powerful tapestry that attempts to chart the full spectrum of human experience, from the ground beneath our feet to the deepest longings of the human heart. A map could be a canvas for a nation's dreams, commissioned by a wealthy duke or a powerful king. These documents were far more than navigational aids. They were declarations of power, statements of sophistication, and magnificent works of art intended for display in a grand hall. The cartographer in this context was not just a surveyor but an artist and a storyteller, employed to create a vision of the realm that was both impressive and ideologically perfect. A sprawling, empty plain on the draft might be seen as an aesthetic flaw, a blank space that disrupted the visual harmony of the composition. The solution was elegant. The artist's brush would sweep across the parchment, adding a graceful, serpentine river to give the landscape balance and life. This was not an act of deception, but one of artistic enhancement, a cartographic flourish akin to the gilded borders and illustrated sea monsters that adorned the margins. To maintain a veneer of credibility, the river might be labeled as seasonal or rain-fed, a subtle nod to known environmental patterns that allowed the artist to claim a basis in fact. But the primary motivation was beauty and narrative. This river told a story about the kingdom it depicted. It suggested a land of natural abundance, a well-watered and prosperous territory blessed by nature and wisely governed by its ruler. It invited the viewer to imagine the hidden dramas of the landscape, the seasonal floods that replenished the soil, the bustling trade that might one day travel its course. For a nascent nation, such a map was a powerful tool for building identity. A river drawn on a map, even a speculative one, could become a symbol around which legends coalesced, a geographic anchor for a shared sense of destiny. The Phantom River, in this light, is a stroke of artistic genius. It transforms a functional document into a piece of propaganda and a work of imaginative literature. It reminds us that every map is an argument, a carefully constructed version of reality designed to persuade, to inspire, and to tell a story about the world and our place within it. This artistic impulse, however, would soon collide with a new, uncompromising demand for objective truth, a collision that would redefine the very purpose of a map and threaten to banish its beautiful phantoms forever. A river could be a weapon as sharp as any sword. In the grand halls of Europe, rival monarchs would unfurl competing maps of the same contested borderlands. On one map, a valley might appear as a barren, useless wasteland, a territory not worth defending. On the rival king's map, drawn by his own loyal cartographers, that very same valley would be graced by a wide, navigable river, its banks dotted with prosperous villages. This was not a simple disagreement over geography. It was a deliberate act of political theater, a way to manufacture a claim to land, resources, and strategic advantage. By inking a river onto the parchment, a ruler could argue that his domain was naturally blessed, fertile, and divinely ordained for expansion. The seasonal nature of many real waterways offered the perfect diplomatic shield. If an opposing ambassador traveled to the site and found only a dry gulch, the claim could not be easily disproven. The court cartographer would simply shrug and explain that the ambassador had visited during the dry season and that the life-giving waters would surely return with the rains. This practice, known as nationalistic cartography, transformed maps from tools of exploration into instruments of empire. A phantom river became a line of argument, a symbol of a kingdom's vitality and its sovereign right to control the land. The map was no longer a passive record. It was an active participant in the struggle for power, a beautifully rendered piece of propaganda designed to persuade allies and intimidate foes. This manipulation of hydrography extended seamlessly into the cutthroat world of commerce, where a strategically placed blue line on a secret chart could mean the difference between bankruptcy and a monopoly on unimaginable wealth. The most valuable secrets were not found in spice bazaars or royal treasuries, but on a sheet of parchment. In the cutthroat world of medieval trade, a map was more than a guide, it was a weapon. A merchant guild that had spent generations and countless lives discovering a reliable path through a mountain pass, or a water source that appeared only in a specific lunar month, had no intention of sharing that knowledge with rivals. The solution was a brilliant and ruthless form of cartographic deception. A map sold to an outsider, or perhaps carelessly left where a competitor's spy might find it, would be a masterpiece of misinformation. It would show a wide, inviting river cutting through the heart of a desert, a perfect highway for a rival caravan. But this river was a phantom, a carefully placed trap. It was a real geographic feature, a wadi that did indeed flow, but only for a few treacherous days each year after distant storms. The map itself was not a complete lie. it was a puzzle with the most crucial piece missing: the knowledge of the seasonal cycle. An unsuspecting merchant trusting the parchment would plan his entire expedition around this river, loading his camels with goods but not enough water for a long, dry trek. He would arrive at the coordinates to find only a sun-baked canyon, his supplies dwindling, his mission doomed. Meanwhile, the guild that created the false map would be using their secret, less dramatic route, a chain of small, reliable wells known only to them, moving their goods to market unopposed. This practice reveals that some phantom rivers were not errors of observation or acts of faith. They were deliberate acts of economic warfare, drawn with cold calculation to mislead and bankrupt competitors. The blue line on the map was a snare, and the desert sun was its trigger. This cynical manipulation of geography forces us to acknowledge a darker truth: not every phantom was born from wonder or spiritual belief. Some were born from greed, a testament to the fact that in a world of limited resources, controlling information was just as important as controlling the land itself. And this world of secrets was about to be shattered by an invention that promised to measure the earth with godlike precision. A new kind of ruler was invented, one that measured not land but water itself. The scientific revolution brought forth an arsenal of instruments designed to quantify the invisible. The rain gauge captured the sky's bounty in a calibrated tube. The current meter, lowered into a flowing stream, could translate its speed into a precise number. For the first time, the whims of weather and the pulse of rivers could be tracked, averaged, and predicted with mathematical rigor. This was the birth of scientific hydrology, a discipline that sought to unveil the hidden logic of the water cycle. Scientists like Pierre Perrault and Edmund Halley meticulously measured rainfall in the Seine basin and compared it to the river's discharge, proving that a river's flow could be fully explained by the rain that fell upon its watershed. There was no need for mysterious underground oceans or celestial influences. The entire system was a closed, measurable loop of evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. This new understanding was a death sentence for the Phantom River as a legitimate feature on an authoritative map. A waterway that flowed for only 3 days a year was no longer a mystical event or a seasonal truth. It was now a statistical outlier, an insignificant anomaly in a vast dataset. The mapmakers of the Enlightenment, embracing this empirical spirit, began to demand a different kind of evidence. A traveler's tale of a mighty river was no longer sufficient. Now they required measurements. They wanted to know the river's average width, its depth at various points, its rate of flow in different seasons. If such data could not be provided, the river was omitted or, at best, relegated to a faint, dashed line with a skeptical label. The map was being stripped of its narrative power and reinvented as a precise technical document. This shift represented a profound change in humanity's relationship with the natural world. The land was no longer a story to be interpreted, but a machine to be understood. The beautiful, ambiguous phantoms that had danced across parchment for centuries, born from story and faith, had no place in this new world of numbers. They were pushed to the margins, becoming curiosities for folklorists rather than essential data for geographers. The definitive map now depicted a single, objective reality, a world frozen in a moment of scientific certainty, leaving no room for the rivers that lived in the spaces between the measurements. The same satellite technology that seemed to banish the Phantom River has now begun to resurrect it, revealing a stunning truth hidden beneath the sand. High-resolution radar and infrared imaging can peer through the surface of the driest deserts, mapping the contours of the land that our eyes cannot see. What these instruments reveal are the ghosts of rivers past, vast networks of paleo-drainage channels carved by ancient waterways that flowed thousands of years ago. These are not mere dry gullies, but the deep, meandering scars of colossal river systems that once sustained lush environments where there is now only dust. The course of one of these buried rivers, shockingly, often aligns almost perfectly with the blue line of a phantom river drawn on a medieval map. How could a cartographer centuries ago have known about a river that vanished millennia before his own birth? The answer lies not in mystical vision, but in the landscape's own memory. Even when buried, these ancient riverbeds influence the world above. The soil is different, the vegetation is slightly greener and more resilient, and after rare, heavy rains, water will pool and flow along these hidden channels, briefly reanimating the ghost. A traveler witnessing this sudden, miraculous flow in the desert would have no reason to believe it was a temporary resurrection. They would simply report a river, and the mapmaker, seeing the evidence on the ground and hearing the consistent local stories about water appearing in that very spot, would faithfully record it. The map was not wrong. It was documenting a deep geological truth, a hydrological echo that still pulsed faintly through the land. This means an old map might not be an error-filled artifact, but a precious snapshot of a different climate. Climate change archaeology shows us that the world's arid zones have not always been so dry. There were periods, sometimes lasting centuries, when the Sahara was a green savanna crisscrossed with permanent rivers, or when the heart of Arabia received reliable monsoon rains. A map drawn during one of these wet phases would depict a world of abundance, with rivers that were very real and vital to the people living there. A map drawn just a few hundred years later, after a climatic shift had turned the rains away, would show the same region as a barren wasteland. The later cartographer, comparing his dry reality to the older, verdant map, would dismiss the rivers as phantoms, as legendary mistakes. But the first map was just as accurate for its time as the second was for its. This realization transforms these ancient documents from simple guides into dynamic records of environmental history. They become data points in the planet's long story of change, showing us that a river on a map is not always a statement about what is, but sometimes a whisper of what was, and a warning of what could be again. The Phantom River challenges our arrogance, asking if our own precise maps, for all their technological brilliance, might one day be seen as the charming, inaccurate relics of a world that no longer exists. A single sheet of parchment often holds more than one map. The most precious manuscripts were sometimes scraped clean and reused, a practice that created a palimpsest where the ghost of the old writing lingered beneath the new. An ancient map is a geographical palimpsest. Its surface shows the world as the cartographer intended to present it, a clean and authoritative image. But if you look closely, you can see the faint, imperfectly erased layers beneath. You see the line of a river, but that single blue stroke is actually a composite of many different truths. The first layer is the physical land itself, the deep canyon that suggests flowing water. The second is the mythological belief, the sacred text that speaks of a hidden, divine river. The third is the political ambition of the king who commissioned the map, wanting his realm to appear well-watered and prosperous. The fourth is the artistic flourish of the cartographer, balancing the composition with a graceful curve. And the fifth is the environmental memory, the echo of a wetter climate when the river truly flowed. The phantom river that appears with the rain is not an error bleeding through. It is a deliberate, visible layer, a testament to a way of knowing that accepted the world as dynamic and full of potential. To truly read such a map, you cannot simply look for accuracy. You must learn to read all these layers at once, to appreciate the document as a complex cultural artifact. This is why understanding these phantoms requires the tools of a historian, a climatologist, a folklorist, and an artist all at once. The map becomes a meeting point for different ways of seeing, a single object that contains a whole world of meaning. It challenges our modern habit of seeking a single, simple truth, inviting us instead to appreciate the rich, overlapping stories that have always been written upon the land. Unraveling a single phantom river on a map demands the skills of an entire academy of experts. A historian's work begins in the quiet of an archive, carefully dating the parchment and tracing the journey of the cartographer who held the pen. They might discover the map was created during a period of intense exploration, when reports from newly contacted lands were flooding in, a context that explains the rush to fill empty spaces. Meanwhile, a folklorist listens to a different kind of record, sifting through ancient songs and local legends. They might find a tale about a spirit who opens the river gates only when the moon is full, a poetic explanation for a seasonal flash flood. Their work decodes the mythic language that the mapmaker may have taken as literal truth. Each expert speaks a different language, but they are all reading the same story. The hydrologist then brings a calculator to the campfire tales. By analyzing rainfall data and satellite images of the watershed, they can determine if the region even receives enough precipitation to create a temporary watercourse. Could that legendary river of gold have been a wadi that flows for just 10 days a year after monsoons in distant mountains? The hydrologist provides the physical possibility, the scientific mechanism behind the miracle. Finally, the geologist walks the dry riverbed itself, reading the story written in the stones. The presence of smooth, water-worn pebbles in a desert canyon confirms that a powerful force of water shaped this land, whether it was last week or 10,000 years ago. They provide the tangible evidence that the land itself remembers the water. Today, this collaborative investigation is supercharged by digital tools. A cartographer can layer a medieval map onto a modern satellite image, watching as the ghostly blue line snaps into alignment with a faint, vegetation-covered path visible only from space. Geographic information systems allow researchers to combine historical texts, climatic models, and geological surveys into a single, interactive palimpsest. The answer to the mystery is never a single eureka, a moment, but a slow, patient weaving together of these disparate threads. It is a process that reveals the phantom river not as a mistake to be corrected, but as a conversation across centuries, a dialogue between the human urge to document, the land's capacity for change, and the stories we tell to bridge the gap between them. This high-tech detective work begins with a simple yet powerful act of alignment. A researcher in a modern lab calls up a high-resolution scan of a 500-year-old map on one screen. On another, they display a satellite image of the same region, rendered with false color infrared to reveal subtle differences in vegetation and soil moisture. With a few clicks, they stretch and warp the old parchment, its edges distorted by time until its landmarks snap into place over the contemporary landscape. And there it is, the bold blue line of a phantom river, dismissed for centuries as a cartographic fantasy, now traces perfectly along a faint greenish streak visible only from orbit. This streak is a paleochannel, the ghost of a real river that flowed in a wetter climatic era, its buried moisture still nurturing a distinct line of hardy desert plants. The map was not wrong. It was preserving a deep environmental truth that had become invisible to the naked eye. Geographic Information Systems, or GIS, are the time machines making these connections possible. Think of GIS not as a simple map, but as a vast, intelligent layering system. It allows scientists to stack information like transparent sheets on an overhead projector. One layer is the historical map, another is modern elevation data, a third shows rainfall patterns, a fourth reveals underground aquifers. By sliding these layers over one another, patterns emerge that were impossible to see before. A phantom river might not align with any surface water today, but the GIS analysis could show it follows a clear geological fault line, a crack in the Earth's crust where water would naturally seep to the surface or where a temporary stream would form after rains. The mapmaker saw the water and drew the river. The GIS software reveals the hidden reason why the water was there in the first place. We can now test the seasonal hypothesis with mathematical precision. Researchers can pull up centuries of climate data, pieced together from tree rings, ice cores, and sediment layers. They can create a model of how much rain fell in a particular valley each year for the last 1,000 years. Then they can correlate this with the accounts of travelers. That merchant who swore he saw a mighty river, the climate model might show that the year of his journey was an unusually wet El Niño year, a once-in-a-generation event that would have filled a dry wadi for months instead of days. The soldier who found only dust marched through during a prolonged drought. Both were telling the truth, but only a modern analysis of long-term climate cycles can reconcile their contradictory stories. The Phantom River becomes a data point in a much larger story of environmental fluctuation. This process is transforming these beautiful old maps from decorative artifacts into serious scientific instruments. They are no longer just wrong versions of our correct world. They are snapshots of a specific environmental moment, data-filled puzzles that, when solved, tell us profound stories about climate change, human migration, and the enduring relationship between people and a dynamic planet. The cartographer's pen, guided by story and observation, captured a reality that our own eyes could not see until we learned to look with the aid of satellites and supercomputers. The river was always there, waiting not for the rain, but for us to develop the tools to understand its silent language. This idea of a river waiting for its moment transforms the map from a simple tool into a profound philosophical statement. The blue line on the parchment is no longer just a potential waterway. It becomes a metaphor for all knowledge that lies dormant, invisible to our ordinary senses until the right conditions awaken it. The rain is not merely a weather event. It represents the downpour of a new question, the storm of a technological breakthrough, or the gentle shower of a shifted perspective. For centuries, the structure of DNA was a phantom river, its double helix present in every cell but utterly unseen, waiting for the reign of X-ray crystallography to make its twisted ladder manifest. The map in this light is a testament to an ancient intuition that truth is often concealed, not absent. It charts a landscape where reality has layers, where what is visible is only a small part of a much deeper story. The cartographer was not just drawing the earth, they were mapping the very relationship between the seen and the unseen, the known and the knowable. They understood that the world holds its secrets closely, revealing them only when we are prepared to look in the right way at the right time. This suggests that the greatest discoveries are not inventions but revelations. They were always there, like a riverbed carved into the desert floor, waiting for the rain of human curiosity to bring them to life. The Phantom River challenges our modern arrogance, asking if our current maps, for all their detail, are still missing the hidden rivers of knowledge that flow just beneath the surface of our understanding. The hunt for these cartographic ghosts has become a modern pilgrimage. Armed with high-resolution scans of medieval maps and GPS coordinates, a new kind of adventurer sets out into the world's arid zones. Their goal is not simply to reach a place but to arrive at a moment. They are chasing the Phantom River's brief awakening, hoping to stand on the cracked earth of a wadi as the first drops of a distant storm begin to fall. This is a form of time travel, using an old map as a portal to experience the landscape as the cartographer intended it to be seen. one traveler might journey to the heart of the Arabian desert, following a blue line drawn by a Venetian mapmaker centuries ago. For weeks, they find only a vast, silent emptiness under a relentless sun, but they wait, camping near the dry channel, their eyes on satellite weather reports. Then the horizon darkens, the air cools, the first fat raindrops hit the parched ground, and within hours a trickle begins, then a flow, then a roaring, churning torrent where there was only dust. In that moment, the map is no longer a historical artifact. It is a perfect, real-time guide. The traveler witnesses the very event that justified the cartographer's pen, a validation that bridges 500 years in a single, exhilarating downpour. Their quest is deeply imaginative. It is an attempt to see the land not as a fixed set of coordinates, but as a place of possibility. These modern explorers understand that they are not correcting an old mistake, but participating in an ancient cycle. They are fulfilling the prophecy embedded in the parchment, becoming the eyewitness that the long-dead mapmaker always knew would come. Their journey raises a profound question about our own relationship with the world. In an age of instant digital maps that show us every street and building, have we lost the capacity for this kind of geographical wonder? The tourist chasing a phantom river is not looking for efficiency. They are seeking an encounter with the unpredictable, living heart of the planet, a reminder that the Earth still holds mysteries that can only be unlocked by patience, timing, and a willingness to get caught in the rain. Our journey through these phantom rivers ultimately washes away the very idea of a simple map. These documents are not failed photographs of the world, but intricate cultural diaries. Every line, every choice of color, every deliberate inclusion of a river that sleeps for most of the year speaks volumes about the people who held the pen. They reveal a society's deepest fears of the unknown, its spiritual beliefs about a living Earth, its hard-won environmental knowledge passed down through generations, and its artistic desire to create a world of balance and beauty. The river that appears only with the rain is a perfect symbol of this complex worldview. It represents an acceptance of mystery, a recognition that the planet operates on cycles larger than any single human lifetime. It is a testament to a time when geography and story were inseparable partners, when a landscape was understood not just by its coordinates, but by the myths, warnings, and hopes it inspired. This challenges our modern instinct to dismiss the past as ignorant. Instead, it invites us to become better readers of history, to approach ancient artifacts with a sense of nuance and wonder. We learn to look for the layers, to see the geological fact beneath the spiritual belief, the political ambition alongside the artistic flourish. These maps are humble reminders that our own grasp on reality is always provisional. The most precise satellite image we have today is still just a single frame from an endlessly long film. It cannot show what the land remembers or what it might become. The Phantom River teaches us that truth is not always a constant, measurable thing. Sometimes it is a potential, waiting in the dry riverbeds of our understanding for the right question, the right technology, the right moment of rain to reveal its flowing, undeniable presence. So the next time you unfold an old map or simply walk through a familiar landscape, pause for a moment, look beyond the lines and the labels. Ask yourself what stories the land is trying to tell. That gentle dip in a field might be the ghost of a forgotten stream. The peculiar curve of a country road might trace the bank of a river that vanished a century ago. Every place holds these hidden geographies, these phantom rivers of history, memory, and ecology, waiting just beneath the surface of our everyday perception. We invite you to become a modern cartographer of these secrets. Do you have an old family map tucked away in an attic, filled with puzzling features? Have you noticed a strange contour in your own neighborhood that hints at a lost waterway? Share your discoveries and thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear about the mysterious maps you have encountered. If this journey into the place where myth meets the land has sparked your curiosity, consider subscribing for more explorations into history's greatest enigmas. Our next adventure is just around the corner. Until then, keep a watchful eye on the horizon and an open mind. Keep searching for the rivers that only appear when the rain